Hi, today's short video is going to focus on Tim O'Brien's book, The Things They Carried. This collection of stories, and this is really known as a linked story collection, is notable for many reasons. One of the most important reasons that we talk about this book is to study literary structure. If you look at the way Tim O'Brien links the stories in this book, you'll notice that he has done so in a very creative way to achieve the effect that he wants. Now, in most novels, and linked story collections often read like novels, although they're not. In most novels, the conventional way to tell a story is chronologically. But as we start to study literature and we look at more sophisticated forms of literature, we start to see authors taking risks and exploring different ways to tell a story, playing with the structure of the narration so that you can achieve a certain effect. This is something that Tim O'Brien really excels in this particular book. There are within this collection certain stories that I consider anchor stories. I consider them to be really important, powerful pieces that tie together everything else. And then in between some of these longer anchor stories, O'Brien will mix in some very short pieces that are often a couple pages long. You may have noticed them. And it's easy to overlook those short pieces and just fly right through them and see them as filler, but they're really not. They're really serving a very important function in pulling the whole collection together so that it is seen more as a whole piece than a collection of stories. One of these stories where we see this happen with is the opening story, the title story, The Things They Carried. Now, the emphasis of this story is on a sense of burden. Literally, the story will tell us about the actual things that the soldiers carried through Vietnam. There is a heavy reliance on listing, and there's a heavy reliance sometimes even on telling us the exact weight of the items that the men had to carry in their packs as they trudged through Vietnam. It's an unusual technique for a writer to actually tell us how much everything weighs. But it's clear to me that O'Brien is really trying to emphasize to us the weight that each man carries. There are, of course, different types of burdens that we all carry throughout life. And in this collection, there is the actual physical burden that the men have to carry as they go through Vietnam. But mixed in among the physical things that they carry are also emotional burdens that they carry. O'Brien will talk about the weight of the radio and the weight of the supplies and the rations that they had to lug through the jungles. And interspersed in between some of these concrete and tangible things, he will slip in something that's not tangible at all. They carried each other. They carried the land itself. They carried gravity. When O'Brien launches into something that is less tangible, he's really calling our attention to the idea that these men carry enormous emotional burdens, many of which they will not be able to set down, even after the war. So this heavy reliance on listing in this first story is something that often takes readers by surprise. Interspersed among some of these lists are casual mentions of people who've died. Ted Lavender is one that comes out in the very first section. And his death is shocking and sudden. And the way that O'Brien writes about it is very casual, as though he's, just coming off of listing something the men have to carry, and this guy just got shot. Later on in the story, though, we see the reason why he does this. If this opening story focuses on anybody, it probably focuses on Lieutenant Jimmy Cross, the young man whose job it is to lead this platoon. And all of the men carry things that are not just equipment and required things to carry. They also carry personal belongings, things that mean something to them. They could be a way for them to escape the trauma and the stress that they are enduring in this moment. One man carries his girlfriend's pantyhose. Another man carries a Bible. And Jimmy Cross carries what he considers love letters from a girl named Martha. Now, Martha doesn't love Jimmy in the way that he wishes that she did. And I think deep inside, Jimmy Cross knows this. But he lets himself escape into the fantasy that maybe there will be a future between him and Martha. He goes over her picture, looking at it painstakingly. He reads the words she has written and probably puts more meaning into them than she really intended. But in the end of the first story, Jimmy Cross takes Martha's letters and he burns them. He does this in response to Ted Lavender's death, probably because he felt as a leader that had he been more attentive and more in the moment, more present, maybe he could have prevented a death. The end of that first story shows kind of a change in character, Jimmy Cross, where his burning of the letters is his acceptance of this responsibility, and he makes a pledge to himself that he's going to be a different kind of leader. He's going to be a different kind of man. He's going to not try to be everybody's friend. It's going to be all business from here on out. And he knows that that's what he has to do in order to get through this experience. So the telling of Jimmy Cross and his symbolic burning of those letters from Martha really do a good job in reinforcing the idea of burdens and what each man has to carry and what each man will continue to carry once they leave the war. All of this is really emblemized in the character of Jimmy Cross. Now, right after that story, right after the title story, we have a very short piece called Love. And that piece really takes place after the war, where the narrator, Tim O'Brien, has another conversation with Jimmy Cross, and Martha comes up again. And O'Brien says, I thought you burned that picture. And Jimmy Cross says, well, she gave me another one. And he still seems to be harboring these fantasies that perhaps he and Martha could one day be together. But when Jimmy Cross says at the end, Jimmy Cross suggests to O'Brien that maybe he should write about what happened in Vietnam. Maybe he should tell the story. He says, I told him that I'd like to write a story about some of this, and Jimmy thought it over and then gave me a little smile. Why not? He said. Maybe she'll read it and come begging. There's always hope, right? Right, I said. He got into his car and rolled down the window. Make me out to be a good guy, okay? Brave, handsome, all that stuff. Best platoon leader ever. He hesitated for a second. Do me a favor. Don't mention anything about... No, I said. I won't. And that's where that short piece ends, leaving the reader at the point thinking, don't mention anything about what? What was he talking about there? You don't know if he was talking about Ted Lavender's death, or was there something worse that happened that Jimmy Cross feels responsible for and he would not want anybody to know anything about. It's an interesting connection between the story which came right before it, and you're not really sure because Tim O'Brien loves ambiguity, and he really kind of weaves it in pretty skillfully throughout this book, leaving the reader thinking about a lot of things. Right after that little chapter called Love is a short piece called Spin, which really is a bunch of little, almost like a montage of little vignettes talking about how these men tried to make it through. There's a short little section where Tim O'Brien appears to be having trouble talking, and one of the characters keeps encouraging him to talk to him and to not keep it all inside, but to keep talking about it. There's also a little mention of checkers, which you may wonder why that randomly comes in. Well, I think O'Brien is trying to point out that the men are playing checkers because it is, interestingly enough, a simple game with simple rules that govern it. Some pieces are red, some pieces are black. You can tell who your opponent is. They are wearing a different color. And there are very specific guidelines to the attack strategy in checkers. That is not the way it was in Vietnam. And I think these men yearn for a sense of rules to govern the trauma they've been put into. In our next little video, I'm going to talk about the story On the Rainy River. which is another very important one. But for right now, for video one, I think you ought to remember that O'Brien begins his narrative with an emphasis on burdens, both physical burdens and emotional burdens that the men are left with after the war. Thanks for watching.